Hey guys, tonight we begin with the forgotten ache of the ancient world. No, not plague, not war, not even the horror of chamber pots. Tonight we turn, quite literally, with the Millstone Turner, a profession so overlooked and so tragically dusty, it makes medieval rat catching seem like a spa day. Imagine waking up every morning before the rooster even considers opening his beak, dragging your creaky limbs to a stone hut that smells of damp grain, goat sweat, and something suspiciously like mildew. Your job? Rotate a 1 ton slab of quarried rock in endless circles while dodging splinters, back pain, and the crushing reality of your social status. And yes, you're probably not surviving this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're asleep in a room not much larger than a storage closet. Your mattress, a threadbare sack filled with straw, dust, and the occasional bitey surprise. No pillow, no warmth, unless you count the lingering heat of the chicken that wandered in last night and chose your face as its personal roost. Then, before the first crow of dawn, you're jolted awake, not by sunlight, but by the guttural bellow of your neighbor's donkey being coaxed into motion. You groan, roll over, and immediately regret it because your shoulders still sore from yesterday's grain haul, and the day before that, and every day since your 11th birthday. You shuffle outside in the gray half-light. The morning air is cold enough to hurt your teeth. You pass a row of lopsided cottages, a few pigs still asleep under torn wool sheets, and finally arrive at the mill. The wooden door creaks open like it's warning you to turn back, but you don't, because you can't. Inside, it's cold, damp, and still smells faintly of your predecessor's last injury. You rub your hands together and look at your sworn enemy, the millstone. Two giant circular rocks stacked like a sinister pancake. Historians still argue whether these stones were ever intended to be symbolic, grinding the soul as they grind the grain, but you're living proof that metaphor and reality are sometimes the same thing. Your job is simple. You turn the top stone, not with a lever, not with water power, because your village couldn't afford the stream rights, but with sheer peasant power, arms, back, and legs. You grab the thick wooden bar jammed into the stone and begin to walk in a circle forever. The noise begins, a slow, scraping groan that gets louder with every turn. It's not rhythmic or calming. It sounds like two angry trolls slow dancing on a bed of gravel, and it never stops. Flour dust kicks up with each rotation. Within minutes, your lungs are coated in a fine film of what you optimistically call breakfast. You cough. It's dry. There's no water. You try to breathe through your tunic, but the tunic is older than you are and has holes in all the wrong places. As you keep circling, the cold gradually gives way to sweat. Your back aches, your hands burn, and your feet have begun to forget what straight lines feel like. You're a medieval hamster in a particularly cruel wheel. A bird chirps outside, mocking you. Your only break comes when the stone needs realignment. Because yes, these massive, back-breaking objects shift. Sometimes subtly, sometimes with enough force to slam your foot into next week, and sometimes they just stop. Historians aren't sure if these pauses were due to poor craftsmanship or divine intervention. You're leaning toward divine punishment. Lunch? That's a stale hunk of barley bread left on the ledge since yesterday. It's dry, crumbles like sand. You dip it into water. Oh, wait, no water, just slightly less old goat milk. You pretend it's cheese and keep chewing. Then it's back to the grind. Literally. By now your arms are jelly. Your lower back is humming a song of betrayal, and your nose is a crusty mess from breathing in flour all day. You remember your cousin who got out of the village, became a cooper, or a wandering minstrel, or something, involving fewer blisters. You'd curse his name if you weren't so winded. Eventually the sun begins to dip. Not that you see it. You only know because the donkey outside has quit whining. You let go of the bar. Your hands ache. Your legs wobble. Your clothes are caked in flour, sweat, and a regret you can't wash off. As you stagger home, a child points and says, "You look like a ghost." You nod, because that's the goal. And still, you know tomorrow, you'll do it all again. You wake up with the distinct sensation that your spine has been swapped overnight with a damp stick. Everything hurts. Even your dreams were tired. And there it is again. That familiar, looming shape in your imagination, round and ancient and quietly menacing. The Millstone. The cursed rock is older than your tools, probably older than the cottage you sleep in, and on certain mornings, you're convinced it's older than original sin. It has grooves carved into its surface, each one worn smooth by years of grain and regret. The top stone spins over the bottom, one, like two plates, in an endless dinner service for a very grumpy god. You didn't choose this life. No one really chooses to become a millstone turner. It's a job you inherit when the previous turner's back finally gives out or their hand slips and becomes part of the flour mix. You remember the first time you touched the stone, how cool it felt, how heavy, how final, like shaking hands with destiny and realizing it has calluses and a terrible attitude. The wheel itself hates you, not metaphorically. This is a deeply personal relationship. Every turn is resistance. It's like the stone is testing you, pushing back harder when your muscles ache the most, catching and grinding with sudden jerks just to keep you humble. And when you stop turning it, even for a breath, it settles in place with a smug thud, as if saying, "See, you need me more than I need you." Historians still argue whether medieval villagers treated millstones with any kind of reverence. Some say they were respected as symbols of abundance, as the centerpiece of life-sustaining labor. Others argue they were resented, cursed even, by the very peasants who relied on them. You personally are firmly in the latter camp. You talk to it sometimes, not lovingly. Grinding grain isn't just a job, it's a workout designed by a demon. You walk in tight, uneven circles for hours, dragging a timber beam affixed to the stone's edge. Your boots wear grooves into the dirt floor. Your shoulder develops a permanent slope. You start identifying with donkeys more than people. There's no music, no cheering crowd, just the sound of rock on rock and your own breath, which sounds increasingly like you're dying in slow motion. On a good day, the turning bar doesn't splinter in your hands. On a bad day, it does. And then you get to spend the next hour fixing it with twine, spit, and prayer. Sometimes the stone gets jammed with a pebble or bit of husk. When that happens, the entire mechanism lurches to a stop like it's been insulted. You crawl under it with a hook, jab at the blockage, and get a face full of flour and mouse droppings for your trouble. Congratulations. You are now part miller, part spelunker, part unwilling taste tester of things you don't want to identify. And then there's the maintenance. A millstone can't grind properly unless it's dressed, which is a misleadingly elegant term for what is essentially stone surgery. You scrape, chisel, and rescore the grooves to maintain friction. It's delicate work that must be done while hunched over a 100-pound rock, with one eye squinting and the other half closed from dust. The chisel bounces, your arm shakes, and you always hit your thumb. In a cruel twist, dressing the stone requires it to be flipped or tilted. And guess who's flipping it? You. Not the priest, not the nobleman, not the overly helpful child who just wants to ride the donkey, just you and gravity and a bad attitude. Your hands are so battered that you can no longer tell the difference between callus and skin. You haven't had fingernails since last harvest. You've started naming your blisters. One of them might be smarter than your apprentice. Oh, yes, you have an apprentice. He's 12, allergic to effort, and believes that flower fairies exist. He once tried to talk nicely to the millstone to make it spin faster. You let him. The stone stopped cold. Even the donkey seemed disappointed. Lunch is a slice of cold lentil loaf and half a radish. You eat standing up because sitting down means you might not get back up. And you're covered in flour, again, every crevice, even your ears. Your sweat turns into a paste, and you smell like a damn bread roll that's been left in a sack with a wet boot. As the sun crosses its midpoint, your vision begins to blur slightly. Whether from dust, dehydration, or despair, it's hard to say. You press on. One more sack, just one more. By the time you finish, the entire floor is covered in flour. Your shoes make soft, pitiful squeaks. You breathe through your sleeve like it matters. Your lips are coated in dust. You are now 3% flour by body weight. At the end of the day, you sweep. Because irony is alive and well. You sweep the flour, the husks, the mysterious brown flecks, and a generous helping of rodent drama into a corner. Then you secure the millstone, gently, respectfully, like tucking in a sleeping dragon, and step outside. The sun is gone. The wind has teeth. Your back has staged a protest. And your apprentice is somehow asleep inside the donkey's hay bin. You sigh, because tomorrow the stone will still be there. By now, your nostrils have adapted to the constant bouquet of flour dust, foot odor, and old wood. So when someone says, "What's that smell?" you honestly have no idea. It could be you. It could be the donkey. It could be the ghost of Miller's past. You've stopped questioning it. Breakfast? That's a fantasy. You've been up since before the rooster invented time, and the closest thing to a meal is the flour you accidentally inhaled while coughing mid-turn. Some days, you chew on a crust of yesterday's bread, which is now hard enough to qualify as a building material. You soak it in water to soften it, assuming the water bucket didn't freeze overnight or develop a new family of tadpoles. If you're lucky, someone brought over a small jar of drippings, bacon grease, maybe, or something that used to know bacon. You smear it on your stale bread and tell yourself this is luxury. You pretend not to notice the fleck of grit that crunches between your molars. After all, you've bitten worse. Remember last week's beetle incident? Of course you do. And let's not forget the flour dust. It coats everything. Your hands, your eyebrows, even your eyelashes have a faint frosting. When you sneeze, it comes out in a soft puff like a bakery exorcism. You tried tying cloth around your face once, but all it did was trap the moisture and turn your face into a warm sponge of regret. Historians still argue whether millers were respected or reviled. Some sources suggest you were seen as essential to the village's survival. Others hint that everyone secretly hated you for controlling the bread supply, charging a toll of flour, and smelling like dry misery. The truth, as usual, is probably both. Your hands are never clean. Not because you're lazy, but because flour is clingy. It clings to sweat, to splinters, to dignity. It gathers in your sleeves like snow in winter and collects under your nails in pale, itchy crescents. You stopped scratching your nose 2 years ago because flour, nose crust spots, tragedy. One sneeze, and you look like you face planted into a bag of chalk. And then there are the mice. You'd think that being surrounded by grain would make your mill a paradise. It is, but not for you. For rodents, this is the Ritz. They sneak through gaps in the wall, wriggle under sacks, and throw what you're certain are nightly raves behind the flour barrels. You hear them every night. Tiny feet, squeaking laughter, the sound of something falling over that shouldn't be falling at all. You tried setting traps. The mice laughed. You tried scaring them off with your apprentice. They formed a union. One even had the audacity to climb into your pocket mid-shift. You found out when it poked its head out just as the village priest walked in for his monthly blessing. The priest screamed. The mouse screamed. You screamed. The priest hasn't been back since. And yet, every sack of flour that leaves the mill must be checked carefully, because you know at least one mouse has tried to contribute to the harvest. You've become a grain detective, sifting through kernels for signs of nibbling. Your fingers are so practiced, they can spot rodent teeth marks blindfolded. To keep things fresh, because of course this life isn't exciting enough, there's also the occasional weevil infestation, tiny bugs that love flour more than you do. They burrow in, breed like they're on a honeymoon, and ruin entire sacks before you can say, "Was that moving?" And here's the best part. If the Lord finds out there were bugs in his flour, guess who gets blamed? Not the fields, not the storage, not the impossible conditions. You. You try explaining that it's not your fault. That flour is a living, breathing thing that loves chaos. But no one listens. You're just the turner, the man behind the stone, the guy who smells like warm bread and mild failure. Even your clothes betray you. Your tunic, once brown, is now a ghostly beige. The creases are lined with flour. The seams are full of dust. You've taken to brushing it off with a branch, because why not add some foliage to your aesthetic? Lunch break comes and you consider sitting on the edge of the mill platform. You don't. Last time, a plank snapped and you landed in the runoff trough. Took 3 days to get the smell out. 2 of those days were spent scrubbing with ashes and despair. So instead, you stand and eat. Again. You chew slowly, watching flour drift down from the air like haunted snow. You're so used to it that it's almost comforting. Almost. You notice a shadow move near the sacks. Another mouse. Of course. You sigh. Some days, you wonder what it would be like to bake bread instead. The warmth of the oven, the smell of yeast, people smiling. But then you remember, bakers also start their day at an ungodly hour, and their bread gets stolen by hungry children before it even cools. Nope. Still better than this. Back to work. The stone waits. You grab the wooden bar. Your hands remember the grip before your brain does. The grind begins again. The wheel creaks. Your knees pop. And somewhere behind you, a mouse is probably rolling its own tiny millstone in solidarity. You thought maybe, just maybe, the donkey would cooperate today. You were wrong. This morning begins with a loud, unholy bray that sounds like someone stepping on a bagpipe full of bees. The donkey, whose name is either Stubborn or You Rotten Lump, depending on your mood, has decided it will not move. Not one hoof, not one tail flick. It has parked itself in the doorway of the mill like a hairy living cork and refuses to budge. You push, you pull, you coax, you bribe it with half an apple and a passionate speech about the importance of teamwork. The donkey yawns. You consider becoming a monk. See, in theory, the donkey is your partner. In villages lucky enough to have one, it's standard practice to let a mule or donkey help power the grind. Harnessed to the mill arm, the animal walks in gentle circles while you manage the grain feed. Sounds relaxing, right? Except it isn't, because animals are chaos with hooves. This donkey has moods. It gets jealous if you talk to the apprentice too much. It refuses to walk clockwise on Tuesdays. And last winter, during a sleet storm, it bolted mid-shift and dragged half the grindstone through a neighbor's fence, flattening 3 chickens and launching your dignity into the mud. Historians still argue whether animals like this were considered sacred labor companions or just mobile liabilities. Some writings refer to them as blessed beasts. Others call them braying demons in fur coats. You personally lean toward the latter, with a side of mild affection, like an abusive friendship built on oats and mutual exhaustion. Eventually, after 20 minutes of pleading and one stern warning about turning it into stew, the donkey relents. It stomps in a circle, sends a puff of flour into your eyes, and reluctantly accepts the harness. You pretend to be the boss, but you both know who runs this mill. Now onto the wheel. The donkey lumbers around, dragging the grindstone with the enthusiasm of a drunk philosopher. You walk alongside, guiding the arm and adjusting the grain chute. The wheel begins to turn with a low, wet groan, like a sick whale being slowly stirred. The flour comes out the other end in a fine white stream. You collect it with practiced precision, nudging the sacks with your foot and tapping the funnel with a wooden stick. You used to think this was satisfying. Now it's just rhythm. The donkey coughs or laughs. Hard to tell. Your apprentice is supposed to be helping. Instead, he's carving something into the side of the mill. Probably his name. Possibly a picture of the donkey with devil horns. You don't correct him. You're too tired. And besides, it's not wrong. Then, of course, it happens. The donkey stops. Mid-turn. Mid-grind. Freezes like a statue and lets out a sound that can only be described as judgmental flatulence. You check the harness. You check the wheel. Everything looks fine, but the donkey has entered what you call existential pause mode. This can last 5 minutes or 5 hours. To keep the flour from backing up, you have to jump in. Literally, you grab the grind arm and begin pushing solo. Your legs scream. Your spine considers resigning, but the wheel must turn. Always. The donkey watches, tail swishing, eyes smug. At some point, your apprentice offers to help. He places one delicate finger on the wood and says, "See, I'm contributing." You respond with a glare that could curdle milk. Eventually, the donkey takes pity, or gets bored, and resumes walking. You nearly cry with relief. You're too flour-covered to show emotion, so a single tear carves a pale track down your cheek like an avalanche of dignity. By midday, you've managed to grind enough flour for 3 loaves, a handful of cakes, and an insultingly small pie. You're covered in donkey hair, flour, and what might be hoofprint-shaped bruises on your shins. You try not to think about it. You sit against the mill wall and take a sip from your flask. It's water technically, though it smells faintly of old fish and desperation. Still, it's wet in yours, and no one's stolen it today, so that's a win. Your apprentice asks why donkeys are even used. You explain the physics, the leverage, the rotational force, the mechanics of animal labor. Then he asks why we don't just use magic like in the old stories. You laugh for 5 straight minutes. Back at it. The afternoon stretch is always the worst. The donkey's energy dips. Yours is long gone. The shadows stretch across the floor like judging fingers. You pace the circle again, one hand on the beam, one hand shielding your eyes from flour flakes that drift lazily from the ceiling like haunted snow. Sometimes, just to keep from losing your mind, you hum. Not songs, just long, slow sounds that match the squeak of the stone and the creak of the wood. The donkey joins in with a bored snort. It's a duet of sorrow. A child peeks into the mill and watches you for a moment. Is it fun? They ask. You stare blankly. Yes, you say. It's just like a festival. Except the music is broken and everyone's crying on the inside. The child nods, impressed, and runs off to tell someone, probably the baker, probably with wildly inaccurate details. The grind continues. The flour falls. The donkey plods on. And you? You keep turning. Because in this village, grain doesn't grind itself. And you, friend, are the wheel. You hear it long before you see it, the screech. A high-pitched, drawn-out whine that sounds like a violin made of pain and wood. At first you think it's your knees, then maybe the donkey. But no, it's coming from the mill itself. The mill's wooden gears are serenading you again. Not in a charming, creaky way, but in a maybe something's about to snap and take your arm off kind of way. The main shaft, a timber beam roughly the size and temperament of a very angry log, is spinning ever so slightly off kilter. You can see it in the way it wobbles. You can hear it in the way it screams. Historians still argue whether early medieval mills were masterpieces of engineering or disasters held together with rope and prayer. You don't need a historian to tell you, it's definitely the latter. Every joint in the mechanism groans like a monk with a stomachache. The grindstone moans, the donkey sneezes, and somewhere deep within the wooden gears, something squeals like a banshee stuck in a wine barrel. The sound never stops. It wails every time the shaft turns. It crescendos when you pick up speed, then drops to a low grumble when the donkey gets bored again. You've developed a kind of relationship with it. A broken, toxic relationship, but a relationship nonetheless. Today's pitch? Somewhere between rusty hinge and angry goose. You swear it changes depending on the weather, or your mood, or the emotional state of the donkey. And it's not just the sound. Oh no. The vibration creeps up your hands, buzzes through your bones, and settles in your jaw like a secret earthquake. Your teeth rattle. Your elbows tingle. You once had a weird dream that the stone was trying to communicate through Morse code using vibrations. You woke up and gave it a stern talking to. The apprentice doesn't even notice anymore. He hums off-key, lost in a fantasy world where he definitely doesn't grow up to be you. You try to dampen the noise by stuffing bits of wool into the gear joints. It works. For 3 seconds. Then the wool flies out, dramatically, and the squeal returns with a vengeance as if offended. You tried singing over it once. Didn't help. The donkey stopped mid-stride, clearly judging your pitch. The squeal, you realize, has become part of you. It's like tinnitus, but medieval. A little ghost that lives in your left ear and says, "You will never know peace." Once, a traveling merchant passed by and asked if the mill was cursed. You said, "No, just poorly maintained." He nodded and ran away. The worst part? Everyone in the village knows the sound. It haunts them in their dreams. Mothers use it as a threat. Behave, or I'll make you work with the turner and his demon wheel. Children imitate it by dragging their shoes across the floor until your eye twitches. And yet, no one fixes it, because fixing it would mean shutting down the mill. And shutting down the mill means no flour. And no flour means no bread. And no bread means riots, crying, and someone probably gets thrown in the river again. So you endure. You learn to move with the sound. You adjust your pace so it squeals slightly less, or at least not on every rotation. You talk to the beam. Sometimes you sing lullabies to the gears. Once you offered it half a boiled onion if it would just shut up for 5 minutes. No response. Your favorite fantasy is one where you inherit a watermill, one with smooth stone walls, a cool stream running through a channel, and gears that glide with the grace of an oiled harp. No donkeys, no apprentices, just water, wood, and silence. Blessed, impossible silence. But this isn't that. This is your life. This is the squeak, the groan, the endless opera of a mill that refuses to die quietly. You glance up. A spider has built a web near the main beam. It vibrates with every turn. Even the spider looks irritated. You sigh and press on, because in the grand ballet of peasant life, you are the soloist of the squeal, the lead dancer in a waltz of creaks. And no one else is going to make this flower, squeaky or not. There's something alive in the flour sack. You're sure of it. You didn't see it, not exactly. But when you lifted the corner of that burlap sack near the far wall, it rustled. Not the rustle of shifting grain, mind you. The rustle of something with feet, possibly teeth, definitely opinions. You freeze. This is not your first rodent rodeo. In fact, at this point, you'd qualify as a journeyman in the field of uninvited mill life forms, and you know exactly what you're dealing with. Mice, again. There's no escaping them. The mill is warm. The mill has grain. The mill has soft nesting corners, the smell of donkeys, and a daily buffet. It's mouse heaven with a side of chaos. And they're not shy anymore. These are veteran mice, flour pirates, experienced snackers with no respect for authority. You prod the sack with a broom handle. Silence. Then, with the theatrical timing of a seasoned performer, a small gray blur shoots out and vanishes behind a stack of barley. You scream. The donkey brays. Your apprentice claps, delighted. You sigh. This is your life. Flour, sweat, and mice. The worst part? The mice are winning. They outnumber you. They outwit you. They don't even pay for the flour they steal. You've tried traps, cheese, bits of bread, even the apprentice's leftover turnip peel. Nothing works. You once found one of your traps disarmed, with a tiny rock wedged in it and the bait missing. A mouse heist. Historians still argue whether medieval mills had standardized rodent control techniques. Some records mention cats, others poison, others, yes, small dogs trained to bark at shadows. But in your case, you have neither cat nor poison, just a whistle that scares nobody and a voice hoarse from yelling, "Get out!" to creatures who blink at you like they pay rent. You decide to clean the sacks because your conscience and last week's near plague scare insists on it. You unstack them carefully, checking each one for holes. There are several, each chewed with the precision of a rodent architect. Some even have what look like decorative edges. You admire the craftsmanship for a second before tossing the sack aside with a growl. And then you find it. A surprise. Something new. Mouse babies. 5 of them. in a shallow hollow of grain, curled up in a sleepy ball of cuteness and contempt. You feel a mix of awe, guilt, and frustration. You let them be. Because now you have to throw out the whole sack. That's half a day's work. Gone. Just like that. All because some love-struck mice decided your flower was a cradle. You take a moment to stare at the ceiling and wonder what your life might have been like if you'd been born just one caste higher. A cobbler, maybe. Or a monk with a quill and zero rodent interaction. Your apprentice offers to train the mice. He's sketching a plan that involves a maze, some bread crusts, and what looks like a tiny chair. You confiscate the chalk. Back to work, always. You sweep. You patch. You replace the chewed sacks with less chewed ones. You shuffle the grain around to discourage nesting, though you know it's useless. The mice are watching, from cracks in the wall, from the beams above, possibly from your boot. You've started naming them, not out of affection, but for tactical reasons. That big one with the limp, that's Sir Choose-a-Lot. The white one with the twitchy tail, Snowball the Vengeful. They all answer to hey, but none obey. You try to console yourself with the knowledge that some of the flour is still usable, that not all the sacks have become rodent Airbnb listings. You weigh out a portion carefully, toss the tainted bits onto the compost heap, and breathe through your mouth so you don't have to think about the smell. Lunch is late. Again, you chew a piece of hard cheese so tough it may have predated the castle. The donkey eyes it hungrily. You make a show of chewing extra loud just to assert dominance. And then, just as you're settling in for the last grind of the day, you hear it. A plop. You freeze. You turn toward the grain chute. You peer in. A small, perfectly smug mouse stares back at you. It's sitting in the middle of the hopper, surrounded by fresh grain, calmly nibbling something it definitely didn't pay for. You blink. It doesn't move. You raise your hand slowly, aiming to scoop it out. The mouse blinks and jumps right into the grinding chamber. You lunge, but you're too late. The wheel's already turning. A soft crunch, a tiny puff of fur, and then silence. You freeze. This isn't your first mouse casualty, but it is your first in broad daylight, witnessed by both the donkey and your apprentice. You feel a strange mix of guilt and pragmatism. You'll have to throw out another sack. You'll have to scrub the wheel. You'll have to explain to the baker why this flour batch smells suspiciously like regret. You mark the batch with a charcoal X and set it aside. Maybe the pigs can eat it, or the mice. Full circle, really. You lean back against the wall, covered in flour, mouse dander, and the lingering sting of defeat. This is your empire. These are your subjects. And today, you lost the battle. But the grind continues. By the time you drag the last sack into the corner and collapse onto your haunches, it dawns on you. You've worked yourself into a fine powder, quite literally. You're not just dusty. You are dust. A moving, wheezing embodiment of exhaustion. But there's a small window of rest before the next grind begins. And that's when it hits you. You don't even get to eat the bread. Let's back up. Every morning, you wrestle sacks of grain like it's an Olympic sport. Grind them into flour until your shoulders cry mutiny, and haul the finished product down to the baker's hut or the village storehouse. You think that earns you at least a slice, right? Wrong. The Lord takes his cut first. Always. A full tithe of the mill's output disappears into a chest on a cart, off to feed soldiers, priests, or whoever else outranks guy covered in flour who smells like regret. What's left goes to the baker. who, let's be honest, has zero sympathy for your flower drenched plight. He nods, says, "Ah, decent consistency," and you want to throw a weevil at him. Then the village families come by, exchanging their coins or goats or promises for fresh bread. You watch from afar as they bite into warm, fluffy loaves while your stomach performs interpretive dance, routines of hunger. That bread, that's your flour, your sweat, your back pain, your mouse drama, and you get what? A cold heel, if you're lucky. Historians debate whether medieval millers were allowed to skim flour off the top. Some records suggest it was common practice to take a portion as payment. Others imply that lords enforced strict quotas and punished anyone who tried. You? You've got the kind of lord who counts his sacks like a jealous dragon. You wouldn't risk it. Not after what happened to old Bert. Old Bert, bless his lopsided soul, once snuck a handful of wheat home in his tunic. Just a handful. Said he was going to make something special. He got caught. Spent a week in the stocks, covered in rotting apples and the occasional chicken insult. After that, no one even looked at the flour funny. You sometimes fantasize about stealing a single bun, just one, hiding it in your sleeve, sneaking away behind the compost pile, and eating it like a medieval raccoon. But you'd get caught. You know you'd get caught. Your luck is that predictable. So instead, you chew on stale bread crusts, dipped in water, flavored with whatever dignity you have left. Your apprentice offers you half a plum he dropped. Twice. You accept it anyway. The worst part? People think you're rich. Ah, the miller, they say. He controls the flour. You control nothing. They imagine you hoarding sacks of grain, sleeping on a bed of baked goods, probably sipping wine out of a hollowed out turnip. You live in a room where the furniture is made of splinters, and your pillow is whatever sack of grain didn't leak mouse droppings that week. It's all illusion. The donkey gets better food than you do. You've seen its feed. It has herbs. You don't remember the last time you had herbs. You once bit into a soup that had a leaf in it and nearly wept. Your clothes don't help the image either. Millers wear pale tunics, white from flour, not wealth. But to the average villager, white equals fancy. You tried explaining once that the whiteness was accidental, and they just nodded slowly, like you were telling them birds don't fly. Even your hands betray you. The deep creases and calluses, to them, it looks like you've been baking. In truth, your hands are stiff from pulling levers, patching sacks, and dodging falling beams. And yet, the expectation lingers. You're the miller. You must be doing fine. So, when someone steals your bread, no one blinks. Oh, he has plenty, they say, not realizing that your plenty is just powdered disappointment. Last week, the blacksmith's son grabbed a full loaf from the cooling rack and ran. You saw it. You saw it. And you said nothing. Because what would it change? You'd just be the grumpy flour man again. Not worth it. The bread's gone. The stone still turns. You keep your eyes on the sack in front of you. It's tied with a bit of twine you had to reuse from an old curtain. The knot is awful. You know it'll spill later, but you're too tired to care. Your apprentice walks by with a biscuit. A biscuit. He waves it near your nose. Want to smell it? You consider launching him into the flower chute, but instead you just nod. Smells like success, he says, and skips away. You whisper, it smells like betrayal. Then you get back up, because the stone waits, and the wheel turns, and your dinner tonight is probably soup with mystery roots. Again. because you work. They feast. And you turn the wheel. The clouds have been gathering all morning. You noticed it while unloading the third sack of grain, just a darkening at the edge of the sky, like a bad mood rolling in. Now, standing outside the mill, you look up and sigh. The wind has that damp, sour tang of incoming rain. You were hoping today wouldn't be one of those days. It starts slow, as always. A few drops, a teasing patter on the thatched roof. Then, thunder. Not loud, but enough to send the donkey into one of its theatrical episodes. It stomps in place, lets out a distressed honk, and immediately yanks the entire harness off the grinding beam. You do not have the emotional energy for this. Back inside, the leaks begin. Not one leak, not two, four, maybe six. You've patched the roof with straw rags, and at one point, a piece of someone's old trousers, but the water always finds a way. It drips into the flour, into your collar, into your soul. And the floor? Mud. Instantly, the dry dust of the mill soaks up the rain and transforms into a slick, gray paste. You slip 3 times in 15 minutes. One of those times, you land elbow first on the grind beam and nearly curse loud enough to be excommunicated. Historians still debate whether early mills had adequate roofing. Some suggest that wealthier lords reinforced their mills with clay tiles or overlapping timber. Your mill? It has aspirational thatch, and it leaks like a colander with dreams. Everything becomes a hazard. The sacks absorb moisture and sag like sulking teenagers. The wheel gets heavier, the wood swells, and the grind becomes uneven. You have to push harder now, much harder, to keep it turning. Your back protests. Your knees consider unionizing. The donkey slips. Not entirely. A back leg just shoots out, and it lets out an offended squeal that echoes through the rafters. You manage to steady it, barely, and now you're both panting, soaked, and full of mutual loathing. Worse still, the flour is ruined. A wet batch is a wasted batch. It clumps, turns sour, grows things you don't want to name. You scoop handfuls of it into a pail and dump them outside, watching your hard-earned work melt into the mud like dreams at a tax audit. And the stench? Oh, the stench. Wet grain does not smell like bread. It smells like something between rotting cabbage and the inside of a wrestler's boot. You try to ignore it. You fail. Your apprentice arrives, late as always, with a broken umbrella made from sticks and shame. He looks around at the disaster and says, "Is it supposed to do that?" You respond with a look so sharp it could slice rye. To avoid complete collapse, you open every window, let the wind in, try to dry things out. Instead, the wind picks up a flour sack and launches it like a ghostly missile across the room. It hits the donkey. The donkey bolts. You get dragged 6 feet before the harness finally snaps. You sit there for a moment. Mud in your ears, flour on your tongue, a growing puddle under your seat. You say nothing. You just breathe. This, you think, is the low point. But then lightning strikes a nearby tree, and now the roof is smoking. You run outside with a bucket of rainwater. You throw it on the smoldering thatch. It hisses. Your apprentice claps. You glare again. That seems to be your primary communication method now. Eventually, the storm passes. Not with drama, just a lazy drizzle and a sky that pretends none of that happened. You begin the cleanup, one sack at a time, one smear of mud at a time. You wring out your tunic. You dump out your shoes. You comb straw out of your eyebrows. Your hands are raw. Your knees are soaked. Your dignity is somewhere under the donkey's feeding trough, probably plotting its escape. You light a candle. Not for light, there's still daylight left, but for morale. A single flame against the soggy abyss. The wind hums through the rafters. It sounds almost like laughter. You chuckle too, softly, because if you don't laugh, you'll scream. This job was hard enough in dry weather. Add rain, and it becomes absurd. Your arms ache, your flowers ruined. Your apprentice is building a raft out of firewood, and the donkey won't stop glaring like you started the thunder. And yet somehow you carry on, because in the delicate dance of weather and labor, you are the soggy, determined millstone turner, the one who keeps the bread coming, storm or shine, even if you have to do it knee deep in medieval mud. The worst sound a miller can hear isn't thunder, it's crack. Not a thunder crack, not a twig snapping under a careless boot, not even your spine mid-lift. No, this is worse. It's the unmistakable, soul-chilling crack of stone under strain, a sound that means the grindstone just split. Not completely, just enough to make everything worse. You freeze, the wheel stutters, the grain clogs, the donkey stops mid-step and swings its head around like, what did you do? You kneel beside the millstone and gently run your fingers over the surface. And there it is, a hairline fracture, a soft line of betrayal snaking across the stone like a warning in an ancient tongue. You are no longer safe here. Historians still debate how often medieval grindstones cracked. Some say monthly. Others claim the good ones lasted decades if properly maintained. But you know better. Stones crack when they want, like knees or promises. And when they do, it's catastrophic. A cracked millstone doesn't just stop working, it lies. It grinds unevenly. It turns your hard-won grain into a mix of usable flour, sharp grit, and the occasional shard of rock that could chip a tooth or spark a lawsuit if those existed yet. You reach for the chisel. You don't want to reach for the chisel. That chisel is the bringer of long nights, short tempers, and calluses you didn't know were anatomically possible. But the stone has to be dressed. Again, you spend the next hour scraping grooves, bent over like a question mark, your fingers trembling from cold and effort. Every tap of the chisel echoes through the mill. You swear the stone is mocking you. The crack deepens slightly, like it's smiling. Your apprentice offers advice. Maybe we should just glue it. You don't respond. You can't. You're saving your words for something useful, like ordering your own funeral. The stone isn't salvageable. Not really. You know this. You're just stalling, because a new millstone is expensive, heavy, rare. The nearest quarry is 3 villages away, and even if the Lord lets you request one, it'll take weeks, maybe months. Until then, you'll be working on a compromised wheel, turning, grinding, praying it doesn't explode mid-shift. Last year, it happened to Garland the Short. One moment he was grinding. The next, a stone fragment embedded itself in the doorframe like a message from an angry god. Garland survived, but now he walks with a limp and refuses to make eye contact with round objects. You keep scraping. You whisper apologies to the stone, just in case it's listening. You try patching the fracture with wet flour, a trick someone's cousin once swore by. It holds, for now. But now every turn is a gamble. You ease the donkey back into the harness. You both exchange a look. It knows, you know. No one is happy. The grind resumes. You slow your pace, avoiding the sharp jolt that comes every fourth rotation. You brace yourself at every turn, shoulders tense, waiting for that final crack that ends your career, and maybe your foot. The flour that comes out is uneven. One sack's soft and fine. The next is lumpy, like it lost a fight with a gravel path. You sift it carefully, muttering like a monk on his last nerve. And then there's the customer complaints. Oh, yes, they come. Why is this flour gritty? Did you sweep it off the floor? My bread chipped my tooth. You apologize. You offer discounts. You offer to regrind. But secretly, you want to scream, do you know what I deal with? My stone is cracked, my donkey is temperamental, and my apprentice just used a flour sack as a sled. But instead, you nod and offer a bonus handful of bran because you are a professional. Sort of. At night, you examine the fracture by candlelight. It's wider now. You press your palm to the stone and feel it. Warm, tired, ancient. You remember the day it was hauled in. It took 6 men, 2 oxen, and one very emotional baker who swore it would bring the village into a new era of grain perfection. That was 12 years ago. The baker is gone. The oxen are dead. You're still here. And the stone, well, it's cracking. You do what any exhausted, flour covered, sleep deprived Millstone turner would do. You whisper, hold together just one more day, and hope the wheel agrees. You open the toolbox. That is, if you can call it a toolbox. It's really just a warped wooden crate with a bent nail acting as a hinge and the faint smell of something that once lived in a bog. But it holds everything you need, or rather, everything you have, which is to say, not nearly enough. Inside, you find your toolkit of despair, a rusty pin the length of your finger, a wooden wedge with one end gnawed by something that definitely had teeth, a bent spoon you repurposed into a scoop, and the infamous mallet, Old Thumper. You named it during a particularly emotional afternoon after the donkey kicked you into a flour barrel. These are your tools, your legacy, your daily companions in the never-ending saga of keeping the mill just barely functional. Historians still argue about the sophistication of medieval milling equipment. Some claim complex gear assemblies and precision carving. Others argue most mill repairs were handled with what was available: rocks, luck, and occasionally someone's belt. You are firmly in the second camp. Your repairs are interpretive. Today's mission: fix the hopper chute. Again, the grain chute, where all the wheat or barley gets funneled down into the grinding area, has developed a wobble. And when the chute wobbles, so does everything else: your grind, your rhythm, your mental stability. Last time it popped loose and dumped half a bushel onto your apprentice's head. He spent the next hour insisting it was a spiritual vision. You wedge the chute open and begin hammering, carefully, not because you're worried about the wood, but because the last time you hit it too hard, a mouse popped out of the beam like a very confused jack-in-the-box. Your mallet bounces. Your knuckles throb. You have no gloves. You are the glove now. One solid hit sends a puff of wood dust into your eyes, and suddenly you're blinking through tears, swearing through clenched teeth, and wondering if retirement was ever a thing for millers, or if they just quietly exploded one day and were swept into the flour sacks. The apprentice asks if he can help. You hand him the spoon. Why do you even have this? He asks. You answer, to remind me of easier times, like soup. Eventually, the wedge holds. The chute stabilizes. You test it by pouring a handful of grain through and watching it tumble obediently into the hopper. It works. For now. You nod solemnly, as if you've cast a powerful spell. In truth, you've just managed to delay disaster another 12 hours. Then comes the upper axle. Ah, yes, the main support beam for the entire grinding mechanism. It's cracked. Not enough to fail outright, just enough to taunt you. You inspect it with your most serious face. Tap it. Sniff it for some reason. Then reinforce it with twine, two more wedges, and what appears to be part of an old shoe. It's basically a support system made of denial. Everything in this mill is held together by hope and habit. The ceiling beam has been creaking for 3 years. The door hinge is made from a piece of plow blade. The flour sifter was once part of a fishing net. You'd replace them all if you could, but supplies are limited, coins are rare, and time is a cruel myth. One time, a traveling tinker stopped by and laughed so hard at your setup, he offered to pray for the structure. You asked if he meant the building or your sanity. He said yes. But the wheel turns. You oil the few parts that are lucky enough to warrant oil, mostly old metal pegs and axle joints. The oil is thick, sticky, and smells like boiled nightmares. But it works. Kind of. You rub it in with a rag that used to be a shirt until your hands glisten like you just challenged a goose to a wrestling match. The donkey farts loudly and a sack falls over. You consider whether this is a message. You sit for a moment, wiping your hands on your thighs, staring at the ceiling. You think about other professions. Shepherds, they get sunshine, fresh air, soft bleeding. Blacksmiths, okay, hot work, but at least they get tools that actually work. You? You get a splinter every 12 minutes and a relationship with gravity that borders on abusive. Your apprentice brings you a bucket of water. It's lukewarm and has a leaf in it, but you drink anyway. The bucket has a crack too. You're not surprised. Everything's cracked. The stones, the beams, the tools, your patience. And yet somehow everything holds. Barely. Magically. Like the mill has decided it wants to work. Just enough. As long as you keep patching it with bent nails and blind optimism. So you keep fixing. One wedge at a time. Because if you don't, no one will. And because secretly, deep down, where you keep your fondness for dry socks and warm bread crusts, you take a tiny, ridiculous pride in making it all work. Even if your best tool is a wooden spoon named regret. You don't choose your coworkers in a medieval village. They are assigned to you by fate, accident, or, more commonly, by the headman's total lack of organizational standards. Which is why your daily grind is not a solitary affair. No, you share this sacred, squeaky workplace with two unforgettable souls. First, there's your apprentice. He's 15, possibly 16, or possibly ageless, like a chaotic wind trapped in a sack of limbs. He knows three things: how to spill flour creatively, how to nap standing up, and how to ask deeply unhelpful questions at the worst possible times. His name is Tobin, though you mostly call him No Not Like That or Dear Saint Elbow. Why? Tobin is enthusiastic, painfully so. Every morning he bursts into the mill with a lopsided grin and a new idea to revolutionize grinding. These ideas range from attaching wings to the donkey, it'll go faster downhill, to lighting the grain on fire just a little to soften it. Yesterday, he tried singing to the grindstone. Today, he's whittling what he claims is a better gear out of pine bark. You try not to scream. And then there's Joffrey. Joffrey is old. Not charming grandpa old. More was present at the dawn of bread old. He came with the mill, possibly installed by the gods as a warning. No one knows his official role. He just sort of shows up. Sometimes he sweeps. Sometimes he sharpens a stick. Sometimes he sits in the corner, muttering about the year the grain turned on us. Joffrey smells like onions. Always. No one knows why. You suspect he bathes in them. Despite this, you respect him. He's been here longer than the foundation. He once fixed a broken axle, using only tree sap and what may have been the rib of a chicken. He hums tunelessly while he works. Occasionally, he yells at barrels. Tobin, for his part, thinks Joffrey is a wizard. You're undecided. Historians still argue over the composition of medieval milling teams. Some mills were solo operations. Others, especially the larger manorial ones, employed whole families or assigned serfs in shifts. In your case, the trio system has endured because it's just barely effective and just chaotic enough to distract you from the crushing monotony. The problem is no one works well together. You're methodical, efficient, grumpy. Tobin is chaos with freckles. Joffrey is Joffrey. This morning, Tobin spilled the wheat. Again. A full sack. Right after you'd patched the chute. It rolled across the floor in a dramatic slow motion avalanche of golden regret. It's like a river, Tobin said, delighted. You said nothing. You just stood there, thinking about other lives you could have had. Maybe a nice quiet career as a ditch digger or a plague victim. Then Joffrey tripped over the spilled grain, launched his broom into the ceiling beam, and shouted, "The geese return," before falling asleep upright. All of this happened before breakfast. Still, you make it work. You have to. Because when the three of you align, even briefly, the mill runs, grain flows. The wheel turns, flour bags fill. It's like a symphony, a broken, off-key symphony conducted by someone with a soup ladle. You develop your own language. A grunt means, watch out, the donkey's chewing the pulley again. A sigh means, Tobin, stop licking the flour. A stare means, Joffrey, you cannot feed birds inside the mill, no matter how friendly they seem. Some days, there's laughter. Tobin once tried riding the grind arm like a seesaw. He lasted 3 seconds before being flung into a barrel of barley. You applauded. Joffrey once sang an entire ballad about flour mites. It had 8 verses and a strangely catchy chorus. You found yourself humming it days later and felt deep shame. You even have shared rituals, like the mid-morning "guess what that smell is" game, or the afternoon "who's yelling outside and do we owe them bread" sweepstakes. On cold nights, when the mill's ghostly creaks turn sinister, the three of you sit by the dying embers and tell wildly inaccurate stories about how millers used to be revered like kings. Tobin believes you. Joffrey insists he was one. You smile, because despite the sweat, the chaos, the sheer absurdity, you're not alone. You've got an apprentice with more ideas than sense, an elder who may or may not be part onion, and a donkey who listens better than either of them. It's not a team, it's a family. A flowery, creaky, squeaky, vaguely cursed family. And somehow, you wouldn't trade them for anything. Well, maybe a quieter apprentice, or a coworker who doesn't hum about mites, or gloves. Yes, definitely gloves. You're halfway through a sack of rye when the visitors arrive. Now, you don't get many guests at the mill, and when you do, they're usually one of 3 kinds. Villagers angry about flour quality, merchants trying to underpay you in shiny rocks, or small children convinced there's a dragon inside the grindstone. But today it's worse. It's inspectors. You hear the clatter of hooves first, then the unmistakable jangle of too many decorative buckles. 2 men in crisp cloaks ride up with scrolls, expressions like spoiled butter, and an energy that screams, "We've never worked a day in our lives, and we're proud of it." They dismount slowly, dramatically. One adjusts his belt with exaggerated flair. The other pulls out a quill immediately. You hate him instantly. "Official mill inspection," announces the taller one, who smells faintly of ink and disdain. "We're here to assess your compliance with the Manorial Milling Ordinance 132G. You nod slowly, as if you know what that is. Historians still argue whether such inspections were standardized or just a pretext for lords to extract more taxes. You? You're living proof of the latter. The inspectors walk in. They do not remove their boots. They step directly into the flour and leave a trail of muddy royalty through your workspace. Tobin salutes them with the broom. Joffrey yells, "I remember you," which is deeply concerning because you're almost certain he doesn't. The quill guy, who you've mentally named Scribble, begins writing notes before he even looks at anything. Structure appears, tilting slightly. "That's because you're tilting," you mutter. "What was that?" he asks. "Shifting foundation," you reply with a tight smile. They move toward the millstone. Scribble pulls out a tiny hammer and taps it, as if the stone might confess something. "Cracks," he announces. You nod. "Yes, very old. Historic even." The other one, whom you call Feathers, due to the flamboyant plume in his cap, squints at the donkey. This beast appears underfed. You glance at the donkey, who is currently chewing through Tobin's sleeve. He's on a very modern diet. Feathers snorts. "We'll be reporting that." They move on to your sacks. Scribble opens one, pinches the flour, and rubs it between his fingers with unnecessary flourish. He tastes it. He tastes it. You stare, appalled. "This is coarse," he says. You nod again. "We call that texture." Feathers takes out a tiny measuring string and checks the ceiling height. Then he writes something down. "You're 90% sure," it says, "too dusty." You clear your throat. "Is there something specific you're inspecting today?" you ask, trying not to sound like you've been living off leftover porridge and bitterness. "Ah, yes," says Scribble. "We're here to ensure the Lord is receiving his proper share. Last quarter, records suggest he was underpaid by 1.5 sacks." You blink. 1.5 sacks? "Yes. That would be the sacks we lost when your tax cart broke its wheel and rolled into the river." Scribble frowns. "That incident is not in the log." "No," you say, "but the fish in that river are extremely well fed now." They continue scribbling. You catch words like non-compliant, rodent suspicion, and your favorite, airflow, emotionally unsatisfactory. They ask to see your grain scale. You show it to them. It's a block of iron and a very hopeful stick. Scribble pokes it. "Not certified." You shrug. "It's been loyal." They ask to see your licenses. You hand them a faded parchment with a seal so smudged it could belong to any kingdom. Or a cabbage. They exchange looks. Feathers sighs. "This is outdated." "So is this entire village," you say. They don't laugh. Eventually, after inspecting your broom, too bendy, your sacks, too lumpy, and too Tobin, they prepare to leave. "We'll be noting several deficiencies," Scribble says. "Would you like a deficiency biscuit?" you ask sweetly. They decline. You watch them mount their horses. The donkey glares at them. You swear he's memorizing their scent. As they trot away, Tobin whispers, "Do you think they'll shut us down?" You shake your head. "No, they'll just charge us more." Joffrey nods sagely. "They don't want us dead. Just very tired." You stare at the door where they left. Then at the sack they open. Then at the broom you'll now have to resweep the floor with. And then you sigh, because in the hierarchy of medieval life, you are not a lord, not a merchant, not even a respected craftsman. You are a millstone turner, and when the inspectors come, you smile, you nod, you lie through your flour-coated teeth. Then you get back to work. The donkey is wheezing again, not in a dramatic call the village healer kind of way. No, this is a long, drawn-out existential wheeze, the kind that says, "I have walked this circle 1,000 times, and I would rather eat my own harness than do it again." You understand. You're wheezing too. You've been at it since dawn. The grind is slow today, slower than usual, and you know exactly why. The gears are out of sync. Again, you halt the wheel, carefully, because the last time you stopped mid cycle, the axle locked up, and it took half the afternoon, a crowbar, and two swears you promised never to repeat just to free it. You crawl underneath the gear mechanism, which is basically just a complicated wooden jigsaw puzzle held together by pegs, dried sap, and wishful thinking. There it is, the culprit. A tooth on the gear wheel is chipped, just enough to throw the whole process off every third rotation. You curse under your breath, then bite your tongue, because the last time you said something out loud near a cracked cog, it fell off. Coincidence? Maybe. But you're not taking chances. You grab a splintered piece of wood that looks roughly the same size and begin repairs, which in your world means jamming it into place and whispering, "Don't you dare break." Efficiency medieval style. Historians still argue about how efficient medieval mills truly were. Some argue they revolutionized labor, replacing hours of hand grinding with the elegance of water or animal power. Others point out that when things broke, and they often did, it turned into a full body workout with a dash of despair. You resume the grind. It's smoother now. Kind of. At least the donkey doesn't flinch every time the gear passes that chipped tooth. You step back and observe. 2 turns forward. 1 stutter. 3 more. A cough from the donkey. A sneeze from Tobin. You blink. Wait, did the donkey just cough? Yes, he did. Tobin insists it's allergies. You're not sure donkeys have allergies. Regardless, the beast resumes walking. You resume pushing. And the rhythm returns. Well, mostly. The grind is never consistent. Some days the flour is soft and clean. Other days it's clumpy, warm, or once slightly blue. You don't talk about the blue batch. Today's flour is sticky. Probably the humidity. Possibly Tobin dropped something in the hopper. Again, you do a casual sweep with your hand and find a berry. A berry in your grain. Tobin shrugs. It adds flavor. You consider adding him to the hopper, but instead you just re-sift. Efficiency is a lie here. You spend 3 hours grinding and 2 hours fixing, then another hour explaining to the baker why the flour smells like moss. He says, "You need better quality control." You say, "You need a new nose." Joffrey nods solemnly and adds, "We're all just sacks of flour waiting to be ground by fate." You decide not to ask. By mid-afternoon, the donkey slows. You check the harness, frayed. Again, you patch it with a piece of old curtain and a button. Yes, a button. It works, sort of. You're reminded of a saying passed down from an older miller. A smooth grind means death is near. You didn't understand it then. You do now. Because when everything works smoothly, you wait, nervous, because something will go wrong, and it will choose the worst possible time. Right on cue, the flour chute jams. You sigh, grab the broom, and poke. A cloud of flour explodes into your face. Again. You are now less person, more pastry. Tobin claps. You do not. Eventually, the day ends. Or rather, the sun goes down and your muscles demand surrender. The flour sacks are filled. The floor is covered in a fine layer of dust and regret. The donkey has curled up in the corner with a look that says, "Don't even think about it." You collapse onto a bench. Not sit, collapse. Because your bones are jelly, your fingers are sore, and your shirt is fused to your back with a unique blend of sweat, flour, and emotional defeat. You take a deep breath. The air tastes like wood shavings and patience. Efficiency, you think, is just the name of a dream no one here can afford. You close your eyes for just a second, and the wheel turns. You're dreaming of cheese, not a metaphor, just cheese. A thick, soft wedge of creamy heaven on crusty brown bread. There's butter too, and honey. Maybe even figs? Then something wet slaps your cheek. You jolt awake. The donkey has licked your face. Again, you wipe your cheek with a sleeve that's somehow wetter. Outside, the sun is barely rising, painting the sky a soft, sleepy blue. The world is quiet, except for the low murmur of the wheel still turning, lazily. The grindstone hums. It never stops. It doesn't know how to stop. Unlike you roll your shoulders. They crunch like stale toast. You've slept on a sack of barley again. Your neck has thoughts about this. Tobin is already awake. He's upside down on a beam above the hopper, legs dangling, scribbling something into a scrap of parchment. What are you doing? You ask groggily. Writing a poem, he says, about flower mites. You blink. You get up. Joffrey, naturally, is meditating next to the gear axle, or napping, or dead. Hard to tell. Either way, he's humming. You begin your morning ritual. Stretch, sneeze, curse quietly, shuffle to the grindstone. The same three motions, the same endless turning. But you find yourself wondering something new today. Why did you become a millstone turner? It wasn't the glamour. It wasn't the prestige. It certainly wasn't the pay. Maybe it was your father. He worked this mill before you, and his father before him. The family legend says the first of your line built the original hopper with nothing but an axe and a very obedient squirrel. Maybe it was the promise of bread, the idea that no matter what chaos the world threw, someone had to feed the village, and someone had to stand behind the grindstone and make that happen. You sigh and toss another scoop of grain into the hopper. Historians still debate how much autonomy medieval millers actually had. Some were free agents. Others were essentially flour serfs, bound to the land and the Lord's demands. You sit somewhere in the middle, technically free, functionally trapped. Your days are owned by the wheel. Your nights are loaned to exhaustion. You sweep the floor, not for cleanliness, just for sanity. The rhythm is calming. 3 swipes, pause, adjust back, repeat. Tobin hums along. Joffrey coughs once and mutters something about the flower goddess returning with vengeance. You nod. The sky brightens. A few villagers approach, peeking through the low doorframe. It's always the same faces: bread bakers, barterers, children with buckets. They hand over their grain. They wait for the sack. They nod. They leave. No one says thank you, not because they're ungrateful, but because this is expected. Millers are like rivers, always there, always working, occasionally flooding. Mid-morning, you get a surprise. A stranger. She steps into the mill with hesitation, dusting flour from the air like it's snowfall. Her cloak is too clean, her hands uncalloused, definitely not local. I've come from the next village, she says. Ours burned down last week. I heard your mill is still working. You glance at the wheel, at the patched gear, at the donkey currently licking Tobin's toes. You nod. Barely. She smiles. Barely is better than nothing. She offers a sack of grain. You weigh it, out of habit. It's a good batch. You feed it into the hopper, watch the grind begin. The stones groan, as if waking up again. The stranger watches. It's beautiful, she says. You almost choke. This? You gesture round at the cracked beams, the flower storm, the donkey with intimacy issues. She nods. There's rhythm, life. You stare. Because to you, this place is sweat, fatigue, and splinters. But to her, It's hope. And for a moment, you see it, the slow turn of the wheel, the gentle fall of ground grain, the pulse of something ancient, steady, enduring. She takes her flower, bows, and disappears into the morning mist. Tobin watches her go and says, "Do you think she was flirting?" You drop a sack on his foot. Joffrey hums the Flower Might ballad again. You close your eyes and breathe. Because, yes, this job is terrible. It grinds your body, your mind, and occasionally your soul. But it also grinds the grain, and the bread gets made, and the village keeps eating. You are not a knight. You are not a priest. You are not even the blacksmith. You are a millstone turner. And somehow, that is enough. The moon is high when the commotion begins. You're halfway through a sleepy inspection of the gear axle, meaning, let's be honest, napping in a seated position with a wrench in your lap, when the door crashes open and someone stumbles in, panting like they've just wrestled a bear. It's Edric, the village reeve, a man who always looks slightly worried, even on feast days. "They're coming," he gasps. "Bandits," you ask, sitting up too fast and pulling something in your neck. "No," he wheezes. "Inspectors, again." You blink. "You mean the same ones from last week?" He nods. "They said they forgot a parchment. They're returning at dawn." You look around. The mill is in a state. Flour everywhere. The grindstone is humming but off center. Tobin is asleep inside a sack labeled corn. Joffrey is outside yelling at a raccoon. You sigh deeply, the kind of sigh that echoes through generations. "All right," you mutter. "We have 5 hours. Operation Make the Mill Look Less Doomed commences." First, you wake Tobin. This takes 20 minutes and a strategically placed bucket of cold water. He emerges from the sack like a pale, confused mushroom and immediately walks into a beam. Next, you deal with Joffrey. He is adamant the raccoon is a spirit guardian named Bernard. You explain gently, firmly, and with increasing volume that Bernard is in fact a raccoon and he cannot be put in charge of flower security. Joffrey sulks but agrees to sweep. Then you start cleaning. Flour off the floor, cobwebs off the ceiling, random tools into random drawers. The broken barrel gets turned around to hide the crack. The door hinge is oiled with bacon fat. You scrub the grindstone like it owes you money. Historians still argue whether medieval mills underwent regular presentations for authority figures. Most agree that when visits happened, appearances mattered more than actual function. If it looked stable, clean, and vaguely divine, bonus points. You take this to heart. By the time the sun edges over the treetops, the mill glows with a sort of begrudging charm. The donkey has been brushed. Twice. It now looks like it's auditioning for a Renaissance portrait. Joffrey has a flower tucked behind one ear. Tobin smells like lavender soap, though you're not sure where he found it. You hear hooves. You panic. Then, a miracle. Only one inspector shows up. Feathers. Not scribble. You almost weep. He enters with his usual flair, adjusting his hat like he's afraid it'll fly away if someone compliments it too loudly. "Ah," he says, "the humble mill again." You nod, attempting something like a polite smile, but probably closer to a grimace. He walks slowly, trailing a gloved finger along the beam. No dust. Thanks to Tobin's overenthusiastic sweeping, which took down a hornet's nest earlier, but no one talks about that. Looks cleaner. "Yes," you say. "We've instituted some reforms." Feathers grunts approvingly. He inspects the grindstone. No visible cracks, because you filled the seam with flour paste and sang to it all night. He lifts a scoop of flour. "Nice grain." You don't even correct him. "It's barley." Then he looks at the donkey. It blinks at him, Majestic, shiny, excellent specimen, he murmurs. The donkey farts. He takes a note. Tobin offers him a complimentary biscuit, made hastily and questionably edible. Feathers declines, but pockets it anyway. You watch that pocket with great concern. Finally, he clears his throat. Very well, he announces. Mill appears stable. I shall update the ledger. You nod so hard your neck cracks again. As he mounts his horse and rides off, you collapse backward onto a sack of grain. It puffs like a sad pillow. We did it, Tobin whispers. No, you say, we faked it. Joffrey lifts a mug of something steaming and says, that's how civilization works. You close your eyes, because even in the endless slog of turning stone and sweat into food, sometimes you just have to make it look good, long enough to survive another round. Then it's back to the grind. It's baking day. Now, technically, every day is baking day. People need bread the way donkeys need hay, and you need sarcastic inner monologues. But this day is special. This day, the village holds its quarterly bread competition. Yes, competition with judging and prizes. And last year, someone brought cheese stuffed barley loaves, which you're still angry about. Your flour is involved, of course. All the bread starts here. Every loaf in the contest has passed through your hands, your wheel, your aching back, which means, in a way, you're part of every entry. Tobin is thrilled. He's been humming Ode to Crust since dawn and trying to sneak extra flour into the local baker's sacks to tip the scales of flavor. You've confiscated his apron. Twice. You stand at the door, watching the villagers shuffle in with baskets. Some carry sweet buns decorated with elderflower. Others present dense, grim slabs of rye that look like weapons. One elderly woman carries a sourdough so large it has its own gravitational pull. Joffrey is a judge this year. No one knows why. He insisted it was his birthright. You suspect bribery, or possibly confusion. Historians still argue about the social role of communal baking in medieval villages. Some say it was essential for bonding, trade, and cultural identity. Others say it was mostly an excuse to gossip while watching dough rise. Judging by the atmosphere, both are true. As the competition begins, you return to the mill, not to sulk, but to grind. Because while they bake, you work. Because for every competition, there's 20 more loaves that still need flour. The everyday bread, the real bread, not the showy, rosemary sprinkled, honey drizzled creations with poetry carved into the crust. No, you're here to feed the people who don't have time for artistry, the ones who need calories, not compliments. Still, you can't help but peek out the window. The judging begins. Tobin is bouncing like a flour-coated jackrabbit. He's entered a loaf he baked himself, using your flour, his imagination, and something he insists is fermented apple joy. You're deeply concerned. Joffrey takes a bite. He pauses. Then he cries. It's unclear if it's joy, pain, or both. Tobin takes it as a triumph and raises his arms like a victorious gladiator. You return to your work. The wheel turns. The grain grinds. The sack fills. But something strange happens. People start filtering back in. Not just the usual customers. Contestants. Spectators. Judges. Even the woman with the gravitational sourdough. They bring their leftover loaves. Bits of crust. Crumbs. They thank you. You made this possible, one says. We couldn't have done it without your flour, says another. One little girl holds up a roll shaped like a rabbit and grins. I named it Mr. Crumbles. He's delicious. You feel something you haven't felt in a while. Appreciate it. You smile. Not a sarcastic smirk, a real one. Slightly confused, mildly emotional, and definitely undeserved, but real. Tobin beams. Joffrey gives you a loaf, still warm. You sit. You break off a piece. It's fluffy, sweet, with just the right chew. You sigh. A soft one, the kind reserved for small victories. And in that moment, you remember why you do this. Not for the coin, not for the glory, not even for the oddly therapeutic process of watching grain become dust, but for this, for the way people gather around bread, for the way it brings them back, and for the way, even if just for one day, you're more than a miller. You're the start of something good. Even if your apprentice just sneezed into the flour barrel again, it begins to rain. Not a gentle drizzle, not a poetic mist that makes everything look like a watercolor painting of melancholy. No, this is biblical. A full throated, thunder thumping, window rattling downpour that turns your mill yard into something between a bog and a failed moat. You hate rain. The mill hates rain more because when it rains like this, everything changes. The grain swells, the flour clumps, the wood creaks ominously, and the wheel gets slippery. You've lost 3 pairs of boots and 1 apprentice to sudden wheel slippage. Don't worry, Tobin came back, eventually, slightly damper. You trudge through the mud toward the water chute to check the flow. It's overflowing. You shout something undignified and grab a long stick, the sacred poke stick, and begin poking the debris loose. There's a bird's nest, 2 leaves, and what appears to be Joffrey's other shoe. It dislodges with a satisfying glorp. The water returns to a manageable surge, but your boots do not. They are now part of the land. You slosh back inside, socks squelching, with a noise that could haunt a monastery. Rain and milling are old enemies. Historians note how even the most advanced mills struggled with wet weather. Some had roofs. Some had elaborate drainage systems. Yours has hope. Inside, the humidity is already wreaking havoc. Flour sticks to everything, to sacks, to arms, to faces. You touch your forehead and leave a print that looks like a startled ghost. Tobin is attempting to declump the flour by fanning it with a chicken feather. Why a chicken feather, you ask? It's what the druids used, he says confidently. You don't question it. Joffrey has built a makeshift umbrella out of a broken sieve and a squirrel pelt. He offers it to the donkey. The donkey declines with a snort that says, I refuse to be part of your performance art. The grinding slows. Everything grinds slower in the rain. It's as if the stones are sulking. The rhythm changes from thump thump to groan thud grumble. You adjust the hopper, then the axle, then your attitude. The hopper has absorbed so much moisture it now resembles a damp sponge. The grain inside smells faintly of defeat. You consider emptying it out, but you'd rather not start a full-on flour slide. And then, the leak. You spot it in the corner. A steady drip from the ceiling beam. It lands in perfect tempo with the wheel. Like the building itself is joining in your suffering with percussion. You place a bucket under it. The bucket immediately has a hole. You place a sack under the bucket. Tobin walks in, sees the setup, and says, It's like abstract sculpture. You glare until he vanishes again. You go upstairs to the storage loft to check the reserve sacks. Big mistake. Up there, the smell hits you first. Wet grain and something vaguely fungal. You lift a cloth, and there it is, the mold. A creeping, sinister green fuzz that has claimed 3 entire sacks and begun annexing a 4th. You scream internally. You drag the sacks down, one by one, each heavier than a sin. Joffrey helps by offering moral support and an unrelated story about a dream he had involving flower angels. The moldy sacks go outside. You try to burn them. They hiss like angry ghosts and refuse to catch. Finally, with some encouragement, from a bit of oil and Tobin's surprisingly efficient fire dance, the mold is vanquished. You stand in the rain, smoke curling around you, hair plastered to your face, clothes stuck to your skin. You look like a soggy legend, and you think, why? Why do you do this? You could be a fisherman, or a thatcher, or a person who lives indoors. But then, just as you're about to spiral into a full existential sulk, the clouds break. A single beam of sunlight cuts through the gray, illuminating the wheel as it turns with renewed purpose. The water chute flows smoothly. The donkey brays majestically. The flour pours evenly. For the first time in hours, it all works. And in that shining, soggy moment, you remember, you do this because no one else will, because the village needs bread, rain or shine, because someone has to stand in the storm and keep the wheel turning, even if they're barefoot, even if they're moldy, even if they smell like burnt rye and donkey sweat. You walk back inside, socks squelching, head held high, sort of. It's tax day, which in your world means the day someone comes to take a portion of everything you've bled for while smiling politely. It's an ancient village tradition built on the principles of feudal loyalty, forced generosity, and passive aggressive accounting. You begin the day by counting your flour sacks. Tobin counts with you, which is to say, he loses count 3 times and has an argument with a particularly round one that he insists looks suspicious. Could be hiding something, he whispers, tapping it. It's barley. Could be illegal barley. You send him to check the donkey's teeth for morale purposes. Joffrey is preparing for the tax collector by lining up random items near the door. An old ladle, a moldy turnip, a perfectly spherical rock, just in case bartering returns as a fashion trend. You, however, are preparing in the real way. You're mentally subtracting everything you can't afford to lose. Historians still debate how much tax medieval millers actually paid. Some accounts say 1 in every 10 sacks went to the lord. Others claim it was as high as 1/3, depending on how much wine the local noble had consumed before drafting the tax rules. Either way, it was painful. Today's collector is not one of the charming ones. He arrives on a tall, judgmental horse, wearing a hat that screams compensation and carrying a scroll longer than your hopes and dreams combined. He dismounts with the enthusiasm of someone who enjoys numbers far too much. Mill inspection and levy retrieval, he says crisply. You nod dryly. Welcome. Please enjoy our complimentary humidity. He does not laugh. He begins measuring sacks. You watch as he opens one, pokes inside, frowns like it insulted his mother, and writes something on the scroll. Moist, he says. It rained. Still moist, you offer him Joffrey's spherical rock. He does not accept it. Joffrey looks heartbroken. Tobin returns and announces, the donkey has a loose tooth, but morale is high. You send him away again. The collector tallies the total output. He subtracts the standard feudal levy, the grain tithe, the maintenance fee, the river water usage right, despite the fact that you have no river, and, bizarrely, the wheel squeak allowance. You are left with 5 sacks. You started with 13. He then hands you a stamped piece of parchment that claims you are now in compliance. You wipe your hands with it. He leaves, satisfied. You slump against the doorway, emotionally and physically drained. I hate tax day, you mutter. Joffrey nods. I once tried to pay a tax with a poem. They taxed the poem. You close your eyes. And then the real moment arrives. A young couple approaches the mill with nervous smiles. Their clothes are patched but neat, their hands calloused. They offer a small sack of grain. We've saved for this, they say. It's for our wedding bread. You pause. Wedding bread, a loaf made for the village celebration. shared with family, given as a symbol of hope, abundance, and slightly less mold than usual. You take the grain with reverence. You grind it yourself, slowly, carefully. You adjust the chute. You fine tune the grindstone. Tobin watches silently for once. Even Joffrey hums softly. The flour that comes out is fine, smooth, golden. You scoop it into a fresh sack and hand it back. The couple beams, they thank you, genuinely, deeply. They don't know what was taxed, what was lost. They only see what was made. And for a moment, one fleeting, absurdly meaningful moment, you feel rich, not in coin, but in something that smells like warm bread and sounds like laughter over a shared meal and looks like a sack of flour clutched by two hopeful hands. You watch them walk away, the sack swinging between them. Then the donkey sneezes in your face. Back to reality, but it's okay. Because in this world, even with taxes, floods, and inspectors who don't laugh, you are still the one who turns grain into something sacred. You are a millstone turner. You feed dreams. It's festival week, which in theory should be a time of joy, merriment, dancing, mead, roasted things on sticks. And in fairness, it is all of those things for everyone except you. Because festival week means one thing: demand spikes. Everyone suddenly wants more bread. Fancier bread, bread with nuts, bread with herbs, bread shaped like animals, bread with faces. Someone requested a dignified baguette that screams nobility. You didn't even know what that meant, so you gave them a slightly longer loaf and charged extra for the confusion. By midweek, your grindstone is groaning like an old ship. The donkey is not happy. You've doubled his oats and whispered compliments to his ears, but he knows. He knows this is extra labor, and he's holding a grudge that may extend into future lifetimes. Tobin is frantically shoveling grain with the energy of a squirrel on espresso. He has flour in his eyelashes. You tell him to slow down. He says, "There's no time. Lady Alwina wants her sourdough owl by sundown." You don't ask for details. Joffrey, meanwhile, has declared himself flower bard of the festival and has taken to reciting poetry to the sacks. It's unsettling. Soft the kernel, brave the grind, flour to feed both heart and mind. You appreciate the effort. You also quietly move the sacks away from him. Historians note that medieval festivals were both a relief and a burden. While they lifted spirits and broke the monotony of rural life, they also strained resources, especially mills and ovens. You are living that strain. You're sleeping in 10-minute increments, mostly standing. Your hands are dry and cracked. There's flour between your toes, and you have no idea how it got there. You once dreamed of becoming a traveler. Now your most ambitious journey is walking from the mill to the well without crying. And yet, something odd happens. In the chaos, the mill becomes vibrant. Villagers pop in just to say hello. A child gives you a flower and says, "Thank you for feeding everyone." Someone brings roasted chestnuts. A group of singers performs a short hymn in your doorway. The donkey gets braided. The mill, usually a place of toil and groaning gears, becomes a hub, a meeting point, a sort of dusty, flower-scented hearth for the whole community. Tobin hangs a wreath made of wild herbs above the grindstone. You roll your eyes, but you don't take it down. Even the inspector returns, briefly. "Just making sure you're not poisoning the nobility," he says. You offer him a biscuit shaped like a goose. He accepts. It's unclear if this is a bribe, an insult, or both. At sunset, Joffrey insists on a closing ceremony. He lights 3 candles, places them on an upturned barrel, and solemnly intones, "To the grain, to the grind, to the glue that binds this village. Everyone claps, even you, because yes, you are exhausted. Your back aches like a cursed tree. Your fingers are permanently dusted in white. But for once, everyone sees you. Not just the flour, not just the sacks. You, the strange, cranky figure behind the grindstone, the human being under the powdery mess. The festival ends with song. You don't sing, but you hum, quietly, off key, but sincere. You sit beside the donkey, who has finally forgiven you after you slipped him half a roasted beet. And in the flickering torchlight, the mill feels less like a cage and more like a cathedral, one with squeaky wheels, yes, but still sacred. You wake up to silence, no creaking wheel, no coughs from Tobin, no unsolicited poetry from Joffrey, just quiet. And you know something's wrong. It takes a moment before you spot it. The grindstone is still, not jammed, not broken, still. You stare, heart stuttering in your chest. In all your years at this mill, you've never seen it completely stop. Not once. Not during storms. Not during fevers. Not even that time Joffrey tried to bless the mechanism with goat milk and nearly shorted the axle. You move slowly, like in a dream, checking the chute, the gears, the axle pin. Everything's intact, but there's no grain in the hopper. And for once, no one has come to deliver any. Outside, the sky is gray but calm. The village is oddly still. A fog clings low across the road like a soft wool blanket. You step outside and see the baker's cart empty, the donkey still asleep, a pair of boots dangling from the porch railing that definitely weren't there yesterday. And then it hits you. There's no grinding today because there's nothing left to grind. The grain stores are empty. The harvest was bad. You knew it was coming. People had mentioned it, casually, like a cold. But seeing it now, in the pale morning quiet, it feels like a gut punch from a particularly well-read monk. You sit on the stoop and watch the mist drift by. Historians still argue whether bad harvests caused the greatest strain on medieval villages, or whether it was the reaction to them, the hoarding, the blaming, the desperate scrambling for someone to tax. You don't know what the scholars think. You only know that your hands are idle, and you hate it. Tobin eventually wanders in, rubbing sleep from his eyes with a sleeve so flour-crusted it might qualify as bread itself. No sacks today? He asks softly. You shake your head. He nods, sits next to you, says nothing. Joffrey shows up later with a single turnip and offers it solemnly, like it's the crown of England. You accept it anyway. The day passes, slowly, painfully. You sweep the floor for no reason. Oil the gear you already oiled yesterday. Whisper a few choice words to the grindstone, just to remind it you're still here. And then, just before dusk, a sound. Footsteps, soft ones, familiar ones. It's the couple from the wedding. The one with the sack of hopeful grain and bright eyes. They look older now, not in age, in posture, in mood, in the way people look after, holding on too long to too little. But they smile. We've been saving, they say. It's not much. They hand you a small sack. It's barely enough to make a single loaf, but it's something. You take it, carefully, like it's gold dust. You grind it, not because it will feed many, but because it means something's still moving. The stone turns slowly, hesitantly, like it's waking from a dream. And there it is again, that sound, the rhythm, the heart of the mill, the pulse of your strange, dusty world. You and Tobin watch the flower fall like snow. Joffrey bows deeply, and in that moment you understand. You are not just a millstone turner, you are a steward of survival, a quiet alchemist of the everyday, the one who waits, the one who stays, the one who turns grain into food and food into life. Even when there's barely enough, even when it rains or breaks or disappears. Because as long as someone brings a little grain, as long as one stone turns, you're still here, and that's enough. So now, as the grindstone slows to a gentle halt, and the last traces of flour settle into the corners of your shirt, you finally lean back. Your arms tired, your breath steady, your feet aching but honest. Outside, the night is soft. The stars blink lazily above the mill roof. A breeze carries the faintest scent of earth, wood smoke, and something almost sweet. Maybe grain, maybe memory. The donkey snores in the corner. Tobin hums some nonsense melody in his sleep. And Joffrey, of course, is mumbling something about flower spirits and the Council of Loaves. You smile. Not because the job has gotten easier, it hasn't. Not because things have changed, they likely won't, but because you've survived another day, another storm, another tax, another poem, another sack, delivered at just the right moment. You are the miller. You are the rhythm. You are the soft thrum in the village's pulse, steady and unseen. And now the grindstone rests, and so do you. Let the night settle around your shoulders like a wool cloak. Let the hush of the mill cradle you. Let the faint scent of flour guide you into sleep, gentle and slow. You've done enough for one day. You've turned the wheel. You've kept the hearth warm. You've fed the village. Sleep now, dear miller. Dream of quiet fields and stones that hum. The mill will be here in the morning, and so will you. Sweet dreams.